Shalom to everybody from Jerusalem. I'm happy to open the webinar on UAVs in the skies of the Middle East. We'll start with Dr. Uzi Rubin. He's a senior fellow at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. He's an expert on missile defense and the resilience of Israel's home front. Dr. Rubin was the founder and first director of the Israel Missile Defense Organization in the Israeli Ministry of Defense, which developed, produced, and deployed the country's first national defense shield, the Arrow missile, the first in the world of its kind. He subsequently served as senior director for proliferation and technology in the National Security Council and directed several defense programs at the Israel Aerospace Industries and in the Defense Ministry. He was twice awarded the Israel Defense Prize, and he was also awarded the U.S. Missile Defense Agency David Israel Prize. He has been visiting scholar at the Stanford Center for International Security and Arms Control, where he directed a study on missile proliferation. Uzi, it's your floor now.
Thank you, Ephraim. Hello, everyone, and I'll share the screen with you now. I'm going to speak about UAVs on the Middle East. I won't be too technical. I mean, I will be technical. There'll be a lot of equations and an examination at the end. But that's a joke. I'll be easy on that. So the question first is, was it a UAV? And they'll define it. The growing concern of the threat on Israel, Iran UAVs, and current future response options, and some concluding remarks. First, what is a UAV? An unmanned air vehicle. It's called by many names, but by definition, anything that can fly on wings, on rotors, that doesn't carry a pilot, a human pilot aboard, is an unmanned air vehicle. But that includes everything. It includes model aircraft. I'm sure that some of you are playing with it or heard that, radio control or not radio control. The quadcopters that you can buy on Amazon as a toy for your kids, or use it for taking a photograph. Cruise missiles like Tomahawks that fly thousands of kilometers one way and hit the target point blank, and everything. I'm saying right ahead, I'm not in the media, everything is called the drone. I'm canceling out. I'm not going to talk neither about model aircraft, not quadcopters. Quadcopters are very short range.
We don't hear you, Uzi.
You see the wheels from a runway, or when they are light enough, they are shot from catapults. So we have, and I'll be speaking about three classes or three types of UAVs. There are the reconnaissance UAVs, in military terms called ISR, intelligence surveillance. They fly high above and take pictures and direct, designate targets or direct fire into a target. One step ahead of that is the combat UAV, which you take these UAVs and arm them with underwing arms, and they can now intervene in the battle and destroy targets on the ground with bombs, laser-guided bombs, and other types of munition. And there are suicide bombs. Instead of dropping something, the whole UAV dives on the targets and commits suicide with it as its own warhead. It's like a flying bomb. Flying bombs in the First, Second World War were actually suicide UAVs. So these are the classifications. And the Iranian UAVs have been incurred. We met them first in Israel already in 2005, 16 years ago, when Hezbollah UAVs supplied, but couldn't see such small targets, and they managed to get away. In 2006, during the Second Lebanon War, the Hezbollah launched 3 or 4 suicide UAVs called Ababils at Israel. Two of them were destroyed by air-to-air missile. You can see the debris of one of them near Haifa. 5 years later, or 6 years later, a Hezbollah UAV was shot down by the Israeli Air Force with an air-to-air missile over southern Israel. A year later, another one was shot down west of Haifa. During the Operation Pillar of Defense in 2014, at least 2 Hamas suicide UAVs were shot down by Patriot Air Defense. In February 2019, an Iranian UAV, I call it ISR UAV, I'm not sure about that now. It was a UAV launched from Syria, was shot down south of the Sea of Galilee. Minister of Defense Gantz disclosed 2 days ago that this UAV, this incident was not a intelligence UAV, it was actually carrying, supplying explosives for Hamas people in the West Bank. Very interesting revelation. And 5 months ago, we had Operation Guardians of the Wall, where Hamas for the first time operated suicide UAVs. So most of them, if not all of them, were shot down by Iron Dome. And in the same time, another Iranian UAV, which came from Iraq, was shot down again south of the Sea of Galilee. So we had this UAV problem as a background problem for years now. It's more than a decade. However, in the last few months, the threat of the UAV was ratcheted up by the Israeli leadership in very strong terms. I said back when I heard our Minister of Defense making several occasions, in one occasion was in a conference in September, stating the most significant weapon developed Iran UAV, lethal and accurate weapon like ballistic missile and so on. But most of all, what turned my attention to the concern was our Prime Minister in the United Nations, again using very strong terms, new kind of terror, swarm. He's technically oriented, so he's talking about technical terms, swarms. A swarm is a technical term, lethal UAVs, and so on. Even mentioned one of them, Shahab, what's particular type. We'll talk about that. And it's attacking already. It's not an Israeli problem. It's a general problem. It's attacking, which is a fact. But I timed his part of the speech about the UAVs. It was about 1.5 minutes, and his part of the speech about the nuclear threat was 2 minutes. So he gave the United States in front of the whole world about equal attention to the nuclear threat and the UAV threat. That means that in the I interpret it as the defense establishment now see the Iranian UAV as a strategic threat, almost on the level of the nuclear threat. And it's not only us. Wall Street Journal came out with a very profound article, probably inspired with all the revelation by United States government circles. Iran's armed drone force reshape security in the Middle East, and this is a mild term. He quotes an Iranian official, unnamed official, in that article saying specifically that Iranian UAVs are changing the military balance in the Middle East. And as you'll see later on, there is a lot of truth in it. So don't worry about this, all this writing. This is my talking points. I'm going over the history of Iranian UAV. It started like everything in the Iran-Iraq war. They needed real-time intelligence from behind the battle line, so they came up with a small company in Tehran. Koch company came up with a very advanced UAV for the time. You can see here. It uses very successfully to get information, pictures from the other side of the Iraqi side of the battle. It won them some battles. And at the end of the war, when the Iranians sat down to evaluate how to continue, they took into account that during that war, in the last stage of the war, there was a covert war with the United States Navy, directly. When the United States Navy secured the freedom of navigation in the Gulf, in the Persian Gulf, remember the Battle of the Tankers, it exchanged blows with the Iranian Navy and punished it cruelly. A lot of Iranian ships were sunk at that time. And this was kept under the lid for years. It came out only in the last decade. This was very painful to the Iranians when they sat down to evaluate it and decided that they make a strategic decision. They are not going to fight the US in the classical symmetric conflict. What they need is asymmetric war, and they chose missiles and UAVs as the main vehicles of carrying out this war. As they say, they wanted to flood the battlefield with cheap, unmanned, and expendable weapons. And UAVs is cheap and expendable, relatively cheap and expendable weapon. The Quds Aviation company that came up with the Mohajer 1 was expanded and absorbed into the main industry. And the Iranian established a very efficient way of smuggling everything that they need from abroad. Something that boggles the mind, the creative imagination on how to acquire UAV parts is amazing. The Wall Street Journal, for instance, Wall Street Journal article relates how they use parts of toys from South Korea and integrate them in the plan in order to move the control surfaces. So that's just one example. And then I come up with the Ababil a few later, which is ingenious. It's basically an emulation of an Israeli suicide UAV that I'll speak about later in the presentation. It's very cheap. They manufacture them in the thousands. It's basically a flying bomb, but very accurate flying bomb. And then they came up a few letters with combat UAVs that can drop bombs. You can see one here. Another one, which is another emulation of an Israeli design, the Hermes 450, which one of them fell in Lebanon. Apparently, they copied it. It's called now Shahad 129. It has air-to-ground weapons. You can see them here. And another trait of their strategy is to take control of the Middle East by arming their proxies. They send them not just UAVs, they send them industries and experts to manufacture UAVs on the spot, missiles and UAVs. I won't go over the details here, but the main place where they supply missile experts and weapons is in Yemen since 2015. We see UAVs, Iranian UAVs everywhere. This is a parade of pro-Iranian militia in Iraq. In June, last June, a few months ago, you can see 4 types of Iranian UAVs. This is Mohajer 6, which is a grandson of the one that we saw in 1980. We see Iranian UAVs in Syria. Is a picture of this UAV, Iranian UAV in the air base called T4 near Palmyra. And from Gaza, we met the UAVs made by experts trained by Iran already in 2012. In 2014, they tried to take pictures and bomb Israeli targets. Several of them were shot down. And as I said, a few months ago, in 2021, Guardian of the Wall appeared for the first time an Ababil-like, it's a version of Ababil, operated by Hamas. It's a suicide UAV, again, like the original Ababil, and most of them, perhaps all of them, were shot down. Probably one may have gone through. They released a video of an Ababil attacking a kibbutz near the border and crashing near one of the factories of that kibbutz. But the main place, as I said, where the support is in Yemen. The main thing, UAV that they use again is something that looks like the Ababil. They give it different names, the circulated names, but basically it's the same design. It's a very simple thing. It weighs 80 kilograms, 160 pounds. That's all. 2 people can lift it up with a payload and everything. It's a little toy, actually almost like a toy aircraft. The engine is a piston engine, which you can buy from Alibaba for about $500. It has about 12 horsepower, so it's actually weaker than a motorcycle, a regular motorcycle motor. Very cheap to operate, but very accurate because it carries GPS. What they do within Yemen, they attack your UAE Patriot. There were Patriot air defenses there, deployed by the United Emirates. Where they were drawn, but by the way, they attacked them, and they did, and that's interesting, targeted killing of Yemen, the official Yemen government officials and military officers. And you can see a short movie here of an attack like that. So it's exploding above the grandstand. This is during a parade. Let me see it again. And here this is a grandstand. And it didn't kill anyone, but 11 people were wounded. You can see one of the wounded here. It spewed out little balls. But let's see it again. And here you can see the UAV. This was taken by a smartphone. Here is the UAV coming in. It's an Ababil. You can see the shape of the Ababil, and it's exploding. The next, they did it several times. This is the only time when they blew it in the air. The next time, it blew inside the crowd and killed several high-ranking officers. They tried to assassinate the entire South Yemeni government, but the timing was wrong, and the government was saved. Then they sent into Yemen a more sophisticated UAVs designed. They have a design department working only for one purpose, to design UAVs and missiles that they never show in Iran. They appear only with their proxies. And you see 3 of them, which are never seen in Iran. This one is jet propelled with a small checkmate jet engine. This is the one, the usual Dababil. They send them in and use them to attack targets in Saudi Arabia. The targets are grouped into 2 types of targets. In the nearby targets in what I call the Saudi envelope, like the Gaza envelope, the towns and the townships and the bases which are near the border. They attack military bases, infrastructure, and airports. They love to attack airports. And they attack in the hinterland of the country. They attack oil industry and state symbols like royal palaces. They love to do that. Let's see one case. There is a city, it's a big city called Abha, about 120 kilometers away from the border, and its international airport, is a favorite target several times, actually for over the years. Every few months there is an attack. You can see some of the damage here. The walls are not big, so here is a hit on the tarmac. An aircraft was hit, and his UAV taken from the security camera at the moment is exploding. In this particular case, it wounded 8 passengers. But the most notorious one, the most daring raid was on the oil installation in September 2019, about 2 and something years ago, on 2 oil installations at Kaik and Hurais. What these 2 installations, the total export of Saudi Arabia is about 10 million barrels per day. The Abqaiq plant processes about 5.5 million barrels a day, that means more to 1/2. They paralyzed it with 18 UAVs. Those UAVs were more sophisticated than the Ababils, but not very sophisticated. They had 18, 17 of them were hit. And the other oil field was attacked by 7 UAVs of another type, but achieved only 2 or 4 hits. But that's enough. Just paralyzing this one paralyzed 50% of Saudi oil imports for several months until they could. So you see, this ship expendable weapons managed to cause a tremendous strategic damage in Saudi Arabia. We know now for almost sure for a fact that the attack didn't take out from Yemen, but from Iran itself, from a place called Omidia, which is an Air Force base taken over by the Revolutionary Guard. The route was around the Gulf. I had a problem, a question whether they flew one squadron to one installation, one route, another route. But we know now from the United Nations, they all followed the same route. One squadron hit here, another swarm went ahead and hit the other installation. It's a very sophisticated route selection. And much as the Iranians are an enemy, I can only admire the skill with which this operation was planned and performed. Now, Abqaiq had air defenses, and this is very important thing, quite quite a lot of air defenses, anti-aircraft guns, automatic radar directed, and anti-aircraft missiles, a French system called Crotal, customized for Saudi Arabia. It's changed the name to Shaheen. It's not sure that the radars were working during the attack, but even though they're working, probably wouldn't see those very little small UAVs ground hugging coming from they couldn't detect. So the air defense didn't work, didn't respond at all. And the damage was accurate, on uncanny accuracy. These are the storage containers for the oil, and you can see them hit by the UAVs. Some of them hit once, two of them hit, but all of them in the same direction. It's amazing, uncanny accuracy. This was the occasion where everyone in the world, all the military, sat back and started looking, including our high command. It was a surprise to us, and decisions were taken because of that attack. That was a clarion call. They also managed to hide their involvement in a very clever way. Here is the debris of the UAVs. There were two types, one which is jet-propelled, called Quds 1, and it was displayed in Yemen in June, and then used in operation nearby, so to identify it with Yemen. This one was attacking where there less damage was done. But another UAV, a more capable one, which we now call Shahid, at that time it was unknown, we never saw it before, that was done that it caused tremendous damage. This damage was significant, but not tremendous. The tremendous damage was done for those very slow flying. They fly as fast as you drive on Route 6, 120 kilometers per hour, nothing. Still, they managed to cause this tremendous damage without realizing those actually Iranian UAVs cannot come from anywhere except Iran. But since the debris of those jet ones that are associated with Yemen were shown by the Saudis, the Houthis could claim that they originated the attack, and the international media, some of it bought it. This is an illustration from one of the Western news. I think it's Manchester Guardian, which usually is very amenable to buy all these lies. So they bought it. This is how to cover story and how they didn't leave a smoking gun. So you knew that it came from Iran, but you couldn't show the evidence that it came from Iran. Very ingenious way again. I take my hat off for the planner of this operation. The next operation caused the Israeli government to sit back was an attack on a ship which is not owned by Israel, it's owned by Japan. It's a tanker. But it's operated by a British company that is owned by an Israeli tycoon, and obviously it was meant, this operation, to discourage Israel. The ship was sailing empty from Mombasa to the oil terminal in Fujairah in the United Emirates, and it was attacked about here twice, on July 28th by one or two UAVs. And then the next day came a UAV that managed to hit directly here, very accurately on the bridge. You can see here the suit of the attack on the smokestack, and here is the hole from the attack. It killed the captain, which was on the bridge, and his bodyguard, the Romanian bodyguard. And this causes stir. This caused everyone to sit back again and take a new assessment at the significance of Iran's UAVs. The debris of that UAV was analyzed by the American Sixth Fleet and found identical to those UAVs that caused the damage in Saudi Arabia, which we now call Shahed 136. Where the attack originated, my own estimates were either from here or from there. And if it was this same base that was used against the oil installation, the range would have been about 1,500 kilometers. But Gantz, Prime Minister of Defense Gantz, 3 days ago, disclosed the sources could be either here or there. The two bases where we have UAVs attacking shipping in the sea. Our ship was the only one hit. It was actually the third or the fourth case when Iranian UAVs attacked shipping in the Gulf, mostly associated with Israel. So what we learn from that? One implication is not that Iranian UAV can hit moving targets. This ship was in motion. It wasn't standing stationary. And if the attack came from 1,500 kilometers away, then the range of that missile that almost double. What I hear from the clues in the media is that the range was really increased, although it wasn't needed for that particular attack. And last but not least, the Iranians showed another new capability only last January of operating those very dangerous UAVs in swarm. What is a swarm? If you send them one by one, it's very easy to shoot them down. They are slow-moving targets, and if you detect them, it's easy to shoot them down, even with anti-aircraft, simple anti-aircraft plans. What the other side does in order to make life difficult for the defender is to operate them in swarms, like locusts. Many of them come and they operate at the same time, and you can see an example here in an exercise they showed, especially for us to see what they can do. You see 4 of them coming together. They make noise like the noise is like a chainsaw because it's a very small piston engine. It's buzzing. You can see the accuracy here. And they all come, they commit suicide together. 4 of them lie down, you have to shoot all these 4 at the same time. And this actually swarms your system, the defense system. So this new capability, and this is what Prime Minister Bennett said when they operate in a swarm, it's not that the danger of the UAV itself, but the operation in swarms which make it so dangerous. Let's see what some UAVs, other UAVs did in the Middle East, including ours. There were UAVs involved in recently in conflicts in North Syria, in Libya, and the South Caucasus. Very briefly, in North Syria, there was a 6 days confrontation between the Turks because some Turkish troops were killed by the Assad regime. They retaliated, but they decided not to fly their F-16 into Syria. Instead, they have very capable combat UAVs of their own, the Turks, and they used that in order to destroy the Syrian air defense. You can see a Syrian anti-aircraft system here in the sites, in the laser sites of the Turkish UAV. First, they destroyed them, and then they started destroying the ground forces of the Syrians, and they devastated the Syrian ground force. In our case, in Libya, at about the same time, the beginning of 2020, there is a civil war there between, let's call it in short, the Benghazi government and the Tripoli government. It's a long story, but by early 2020, the Benghazi government was poised to take over, to occupy Tripoli and end the war. The Turks intervened on the side of the Tripoli government and sent, among other things, their very capable UAV, which immediately destroyed the Benghazi air defenses, destroyed the whole ground system, just demolished it. You see another air defense system being transported inside the gun sight of the Turkish UAV. And once they destroyed the air defense, they started to destroy the ground forces, their trucks, their tanks. And because of that, they could counterattack and take over about 1/4 of Libya again. And there's now a ceasefire. They brought a ceasefire. But the most profound place where UAVs were fighting were in the Nagorno-Karabakh war, or the 6 weeks war last year between Azerbaijan and Armenia over the province of Nagorno-Karabakh. We don't have the time to go into the origin of that source and why it's called the second, actually the third Nagorno-Karabakh war. But what we can see in short is the Azeris were preparing for this war and equipping the war, and they took a very profound decision not to modernize, not to invest in modernizing the Air Force. Instead, they bought an ultra-modern fleet of UAVs, both ISRs, combat and suicide UAVs from Turkey and Israel. And what happened was, again, the Azeri UAVs, the Turkish and the Israeli UAV-made UAVs, first they obliterated the Armenian air defenses, completely from the ground, gained air superiority, and proceeded to demolish the ground force. And the result was a resounding Azeri victory. You can see here some of the types. This is the Israeli suicide UAV, which is actually the origin of the Ababil. Ababil is some kind of emulation of that. And the Turkish UAV, which was inspired by the Israeli Heron, but this is armed. Our UAVs that were sold to Turkey were not armed. This one is armed. I show you just two clips. Here is an Israeli suicide UAV destroying strategic air defense system S-300 inside Armenia. You can see it is now diving on it. You can see the radar of the system rotating, but not when it's doing. And here is the crew running away because they hear the UAV coming down. The picture stops a few seconds before the hit. So what is the challenge of defending against UAVs? First, they are smaller than UAVs. Most of them are smaller. Some of them are as big as F-16s, but most of them are smaller. Because of that, harder to detect by radar. Many are made of composite materials, making them almost stealthy. Many are powered by small piston engines. I said you can buy them in Alibaba. They are chainsaw, more or less chainsaw motors, making this buzzing noise. And because of that, they are not leaving a big heat signature like a jet engine. Suicide UAVs usually, not always, but usually fly very close to the ground, and then they pop up and dive on the target. So while they're flying close to the ground, radars can hardly see them. And last but not least, rockets and missiles fly in direct line. The ground track is direct. If they fire a rocket from Gaza to Tel Aviv, it must fly in the shortest route. Well, it curves up in the sky, but its ground track is straight. While a UAV, if it has another range, can go around about, actually can attack Tel Aviv from Gaza from the north. In other words, you can't defend only sectorially to the south. You have to defend all around 300, which of course makes your problem much more severe and much more profound. So who defended against UAVs? We have cases. The Saudis have been trying to defend against UAVs, somewhat successfully. During the years, they developed the systems and the tactics of how to do it, but they use ground-based air defense, Patriots, and they use F-16s launching air-to-air missiles, which is very effective, but not very cost-effective. You can see here a sequence. This is from a video. So you see frames from the video. Here's a Saudi F-16 shooting down a Babil. You can see the typical shape of it. Again, this is a $50 million F-15 shooting down something which may cost about $10,000 with a chainsaw engine, with the air-to-air missile which costs about $1 million. And you can see the hit here. The Saudis recently, there is very little information coming out. There so much propaganda on both sides that you don't know what the truth is from all the, what's the noise and what's the signal in all the media reports. But the Saudis claim that they shot down up to now from 2015 about 1,000 Houthi UAVs. But the UAV incursion goes on, and Minister of Defense Gantz revealed when in his speech at Rutman University 2 days ago that a week ago, 14 UAVs from Iraq attacked Western Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah, near Jeddah, and caused damage and casualties. So it's going until today. But there is another example, which very little paid attention to, is the Russian experience. The Russians received, granted 2 bases in Syria in return for the intervention in the Assad side, Khmeimim Air Base and the Tartus Naval Base, which came under rebel fire almost from day one. After a while, the rebels accumulated enough UAVs, either purchases were made by themselves, to start using UAVs for the attack. The first attack came in December 2017. It killed 2 Russian persons and damaged 8 combat aircrafts, 2 of which were total loss. And here you can see a picture of one. This is not a total loss, but the damage. The Russian, then next, about a week later, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, another large case came. This time the Russians were more ready for it, managed to shoot down most of the attackers, and some of them, they claim they managed to take them over, intervening in their systems by cyber, and forcing them to land down in one piece, and then they display those UAVs that came from the rebels. This one is called Skywalker, and again, you can buy it from Alibaba for, I think, $800. It's used for amateurs, and this is a homemade, something made of wood that boggles the mind. It's so primitive. It has little bombs here, which it drops and cause some damage. But the attacks have been going on ever since. They're still going. So they're still sending the rebels that remain in Idlib are still attacking with UAVs, attacking the Russians. Apparently, with some success. The Russian defenses seem to be more successful than the Saudi Arabia defenses, and they don't reveal what they did, the Russians. But when you piece it up from the media, what comes out to the media, they did several things. First, they retuned all their early warning radars, which are designed to detect fast and high-flying aircraft. They retuned them to detect small, low-flying targets. It's not trivial because when you start detecting small, low-flying targets, you also birds are small, low-flying targets. So you can swamp you. You have to distinguish and discriminate between living animals and UAVs. They added, and this is, I think, the most interesting contribution, soft defense. The hard defense is hard. I mean, you kill the target by exploding. Soft defense is disrupting the target. First, disrupt the GPS, the navigation. They need the navigation, the UAVs, otherwise they don't know where the target is. Very powerful electronic warfare. This is a krasucha. It sends a beam, a powerful radio waves that swamps everything, and you illuminate the target. It cannot communicate with its controllers on the ground. And cyber warfare, possibly, in order to take over. And the UAVs and hard defenses using the Pansir system, which you saw before was destroyed by Turkish UAVs, but against this primitive UAVs of the rebels in Idlib is apparently good enough. Now, this system is simplicity itself. It has two anti-aircraft guns, 35 millimeters, World War technology, and 8 very simple variation of shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missile for long-range war. And 2 radars. One radar is for surveillance, and one radar is to do the fire control itself. If you look at why the Russians seems to be more successful than the Saudi Arabians, there are 4 factors. Here's the size. Size makes a difference. Saudi Arabia is about the size of Western Europe. Saudi Arabia deploys air defenses, as I said, designed against completely different targets, while the Russians, their air defenses are optimized against such targets. Use of soft defenses, I think it's quite decisive. The Russian added it here. I think their contribution to the art. And UAV sophistication level also plays a part. Saudi Arabia is facing very capable, the UAVs are simple, but very, very smartly designed and very smartly controlled, as we saw in the attack in Saudi Arabia against experienced teams. The Russians are facing primitive UAV and inexperienced controllers. So this also makes a difference. What are the implications to Israel? The explosive growth in quantity and quality of Iran UAV justifies, in my opinion, the concern of the Israeli leadership. Quantity is now turning into quality, and UAVs is becoming a strategic threat like the Iranian missiles. I mean, each UAV can do a little damage, but swarms of UAVs acting together can cause damage on strategic scale, as we saw in Saudi Arabia. I'm not very optimistic about offensive capability of frustrating them before they take off. They take off from small launchers or short airstrips, and if you destroy an airstrip, they can build in a few hours another airstrip. The burden of defense falls on the Israeli Air Command, and my recommendation is best first to buttress the early warning system to ensure 360 degrees coverage. We have no sector. We have to look all around and tune it like the Russian to detect small low-flying targets. We have to enhance our hard defenses by reducing the cost of price. We are dealing with very cheap targets. So although Iron Dome is as a missile, it's quite cheap, but still we have to look at cheaper missiles like laser weapons or microwave weapons, and we don't have the time to go into the technology here. introduce soft defenses, very important. I think Russian contribution here is very enlightening to disrupt incoming UAVs. And here we have soft defenses. You can hit swarms of and disable swarms of dozens of UAVs together and harden critical and national infrastructure. Put cement and concrete in order to defend infrastructures, suicide like aircraft pens, electricity stations, and so on. So, but there is some good news, and here are some of the good news. The first, somebody read my slides before even I wrote them, and while I was preparing this presentation, Israel unveiled a very advanced, perhaps the most advanced electronic warfare system in the world. This is a Scorpius made by ELTA in 3 variations, a ground-based, air-based, and a ship-based. And this system is not broadcasting a wide beam. The Russians, whenever they use the Krasucha, they have to stop the airplanes because it's also interfering with their own aircraft. This one is sending pencil beams, which engaged specifically the enemy, so the Air Force can continue operation while this is operating too. This is a very advanced concept, probably the most advanced in the world. I'm not sure the IDF, the Israel Defense Force, already has that, although there are 3 customers from abroad that already bought it. But there it is, and I'm sure that eventually it will be integrated in our defense system. And the other good news is this, and I'm very proud of this because this is the project of Israel Defense Organization, my own organization, by my successor. This is an aerostat with amazingly sophisticated radar system underneath. It goes up tens of thousands of feet and sees, I think, probably bees fly from flower to flower. So it will see the UAVs coming in. And with that good news, I'd like to thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Uzi. And I just want to remind our audience that if you want to have questions, please use the chat function. We'll collect all the questions at the end of the second presentation. And now we'll move to Colonel retired Dr. Eran Lerman. He is the Vice President of the Institute for Strategy and Security. Dr. Lerman was Deputy Director for Foreign Policy and International Affairs at the National Security Council in the Israeli Prime Minister's office. He held senior posts in the IDF military intelligence for over 20 years. He also served as director of the Israel Middle East office of the American Jewish Committee. He teaches Middle East studies at Shalem College and National Defense College. He's an expert on Israel's foreign relations and on the Middle East. He holds a PhD from the London School of Economics and a mid-career MPA from Harvard University. Eran, it's your floor.
Well, clearly, speaking after Uzi, I cannot add anything to the full description here of not only the technical aspects, but the significance of this new departure in the history of warfare, because this basically is one of the most dramatic asymmetrical weapon capabilities that can take a country like Iran and give it the sense, perhaps the false sense, but the sense that it can compete with the United States, at least at the regional level, and certainly challenge Israel, Saudi Arabia, and its other regional adversaries in a significant way. And clearly, the answer must lie in addition to the technical solutions, the layers of technical solutions, the multi-layered elements that Uzi mentioned. This also would require, because of its nature, because of the long ranges from which these weapons can strike, this requires a new wiring of the regional alignment. I'm not using the term alliance still yet easily, but certainly an alignment of like-minded nations that want to counter Iran's capabilities. And the drone dimension now adds to the very urgent need for this kind of regional cooperation. And it is quite clearly uppermost in the minds of decision makers. I think that Prime Minister Bennett's decision to dedicate a distinct part of his presentation was, in a way, a conversation with our partners, or those who share our concerns in the region. Basically saying, we are not only taking note, we will possibly offer some tactical solutions. These tactical solutions can be and should be shared because the threat is a threat not to Israel alone, as we have seen. The Houthi or fake Houthi attacks on Saudi Arabia have been of strategic significance in recent years. Attacks directly from Iran, or attacks from Iraqi soil, and attacks indeed from Yemen. But the UAE and others with interest in the stability of the Gulf, particularly shipping in the Gulf, and others, we don't yet know what is the exact content of the military understandings reached between Israel and the Kingdom of Morocco in the visit that just concluded of Defense Minister Benny Gantz. But the Moroccans too have their own concerns, given that they are facing asymmetrical threats from the Polisario and from potentially actively backed by the Algerians, with a potential for escalation. The Libyan situation, rumors have it that some of the Libyan players, given what they've been exposed to, as Uzi described, have come to Israel for assistance, which in other words means the Egyptians are looking for ways to counter Turkish technology in that battlefield between the two regional powers. All of this basically indicates the need for closer technological and military cooperation. I think we should, in this light, we should look at the really remarkable developments we've seen in the last few weeks. As I mentioned already, the unprecedented visit and unprecedented agreement with an Arab country signed during Benny Gantz's visit in Morocco. But I should also mention that Israel's national security advisor, Eyal Hulata, participated as one of the most prominent guests in the Manama dialogue with participants from around the region, accepting, as a matter of fact, not only an Israeli presence, but an Israeli call for closer security cooperation. So all of this is reflected, I believe, or to some extent is reflecting the growing sense of threat from the Iranian, particularly from the Iranian drone capabilities, and the readiness with which the Iranian regime is willing to supply this capability to its proxies, whether we're talking about Hezbollah, the Hashd al-Sha'bi pro-Iranian elements in Iraq, or the Houthis in Yemen. There are some specific angles that I want to mention. I won't take much longer. It is essentially a question, of course, mainly in this discussion of the nature of the threat rather than the nature of the solution at this stage. But Israel, of course, is by herself a pioneer in the field of drones, and therefore also has a deep insight into the nature of the challenge. And I would mention that the first ever international exercise using drones during warfare has been carried out in mid-July in Israel. Exercise called Blue Guardian, with the participation of the IDF, the US forces, and several key European countries, key NATO members. So Israel is establishing for all to see around the region its capacities. It is also steadily establishing its willingness to act. And the CBW, as we call it, the campaign between the wars, Mabam by its Hebrew initials, the unceasing attacks on targets, Iranian targets, Iranian identified as related to Iran or the IRGC or Iranian-backed militias or Hezbollah. These are constant attacks in Syria, a signal of our willingness to act, a determination to disrupt the line of supply, specifically by the way of weapons that would give Hezbollah the capacity for accurate strikes. And it is, I think, designed beyond the direct impact on the Iranian creation of capabilities in Syria. It's also designed to signal to our newly found friends in the Gulf and elsewhere that Israel is not just technologically capable, but politically willing to use force, if necessary, to disrupt and destroy Iranian capabilities. And that, I think, is in itself a very significant signal in the context of this enhanced element of threat. One final point that I want to mention, and perhaps we should leave this open to questions. The Iranian penetrations by drone via Jordan are a very interesting indication of two things. First of all, they would very much like to find a way to arm pro-Iranian terrorist elements in the West Bank. In Gaza, for years, they had tunnels, they had smuggling channels. I think the Egyptians put an end to much of it, but still here and there, some of this still exists. The West Bank is cut off from any standard line of supply from Iran. And therefore, the idea of drones carrying materiel from Iranian bases in Syria through Jordanian airspace and into the West Bank appeals to the Iranians. Moreover, it is also a way of, let's say, entangling Jordan with Israel, destabilizing the kingdom, destabilizing the Israeli-Jordanian relationship. So these several incidents in which drones were launched via Jordan speak not only to the tactical, let's say, flexibility of drones, which Uzi mentioned, but also to a grand strategic design. Because ultimately, if Khamenei, as he tweeted some 7 years ago in November 14, if Khamenei believes that the West Bank should become the next Gaza, should erupt in active violent hostilities, the manner in which Gaza does it from time to time, then it needs to be armed. And to arm it, that's to say Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad elements in the West Bank need to be armed, and for that, the Iranians need a channel of supply. So the revelation by Defense Minister Gantz that the latest drone was an attempt to actually fly supplies, explosives, to the West Bank perhaps can be, looks like a sign of things to come. And once again, the solution, or a very significant part of the solution, lies in Israeli-Jordanian cooperation. Ultimately, of course, the key responses beyond the specific defensive measures, passive and active, that Uzi mentioned, lie also in intelligence, very close intelligence cooperation, detection systems, and knowledge of the enemy's intent, which requires intelligence penetration at the highest levels. And the second thing that we need is a deterrent capacity. Not everything that the Iranians would launch against us can be stopped, but the cost of doing that must continuously escalate. And in this respect, I would say carefully that there is a resounding sense of disappointment in Israel at the lack of a robust American response to the drone attack launched by Iranian elements against the American base in eastern Syria, in Tanaf. That the fact that this is not met with a very high cost is problematic. I know that Bert McGurk in Manama tried to hint that the US retaliated in non-overt ways, that not everything that was done in response to this attack in Tanaf was manifest or made public. But it is the very nature of deterrence that it also needs to be felt, to be seen, to be perceived in order to be effective, and for the regional allies and friends of the United States to be reassured. And this specific lack of response to this one dramatic drone attack that luckily did not end in American casualties. The story going around is that Israel was able to give a forewarning based on our intelligence capabilities, and the relevant targets were cleared of personnel. But at the end of the day, the very audacity of Iran in attacking in this manner an American target, and the fact that it has not yet met with a robust response is part of what is troubling us today. And at this point, I think if there's some time for questions.
Okay, we received many questions, and I'll start with you, Uzi. Does UAV use only GPS for guidance?
Well, I didn't understand the question. Can you repeat it?
Is the UAV guided only by GPS or other methods?
Well, satellite navigation, yeah, they have inertial navigation too, but the inertial navigation must, which is internal, it doesn't depend on signals from outside, but it has to be updated from time to time. If it's not updated, it drifts and becomes inaccurate. So essentially, it's dependent, the accuracy. If you want to fly it in the general direction, yes. If you have visual means, you can look at the ground and navigate by ground. But usually, most of them need some kind of communication with GPS. And actually, what they use is things like very much like your Waze program in your smartphone. It's satellite navigation. And today, without Waze, you can't find your way. Modern UAVs are about the same way.
Do microwave weapons endanger civilians?
Do what?
Microwave weapons.
Well, if you yes, if you direct them at civilians, I mean, your own microwave in the kitchen could cook you alive if it would be operating while the door is open. A microwave is destructive to electronics and biology systems. But the microwave can be concentrated in beams, in very focused beams, and if it's not directed at persons, it doesn't harm them.
How vulnerable is the Skydew balloon?
Well, balloon is vulnerable, depends on what altitude it comes to. But anyway, it is vulnerable, it has to be defended.
How much training does it take to operate a UAV? Is it something for a simple soldier? Then it's really revolutionary.
So the interesting thing is you don't need much expertise in order to fly the UAV itself. It's basically self-flying. Some of them take off from the head. You can just launch them by hand. The sophistication is in the control system. the controllers, the control software must be sophisticated. The controllers must choose like this, choosing the route of those UAVs that detect former media in Iran, oil installation in Saudi Arabia. Think they had to fly low in order not to be detected. At the same time, they had to avoid fences, antennas, hills, vegetation. So they had to really, and to avoid anti-aircraft systems. So they have to weave their way and design very carefully a route that will take them safely to all these things to the target, and they did that. This is where the sophistication, part of the sophistication is.
That's a question for you, Iran. Why didn't you, Saudi Arabia and the United States, retaliate the attack on the refineries?
Well, the United States was, under Trump, basically reluctant to get involved. And Trump had a slightly erratic decision-making style. At the end, the decision was taken to go all the way to the top and eliminate the IRGC commander behind much of all of this, namely Qasem Soleimani, and that came later, and definitely indicated that the United States is willing to take some serious risks to punish the Iranians for trying to attack American targets in Baghdad. But before that, the Americans were basically just taking stock and looking for an opportunity to respond. The same, by the way, for the shooting down of a large American drone over Iran. By the Iranians. All of this did not trigger any automatic responses. And the Iranians may have misread this as a sign of weakness. They are reading it now as a sign of weakness, and I hope we're once again misreading it. I wish I was certain about it. As for the Saudis, their offensive capabilities are limited and largely directed, quite intensively directed, at the Iranian-backed rebellion or state within a state of the Houthis in Yemen. That's a very violent campaign. The Saudis have not shown great talent, I'm afraid, in managing it. They have had much less of an effect than you would expect from a modern military and a modernly equipped air force. But this is where they are trying to make the Iranians pay the prices, basically in the Yemeni campaign, which is a very brutal one.
Maybe a question for both of you. How are maneuvering forces able to deal with UAVs in contrast to stationary targets?
Well, if I can come in on it for a second, not normal maneuvering forces, but based on very specific intelligence, I would assume that special forces can be of help in detecting and destroying launch bases and storage sites, etc., in a war scenario. In a campaign between the wars scenario, it is really largely consigned to the capacity of attacking from a distance, over the horizon, basically.
Let me add to that this question is now stirring debates after especially in the Nagorno-Karabakh war. Because what the Armenians did, they did not embed anti-UAV or anti-aircraft capability in their mobile forces. They had them stationary, more or less, trying to cover areas, in a cost-effective way. It didn't work, and I think the brunt of the opinion now that you have to reintegrate something that was lost since many years ago, to reintegrate mobile air defenses within your mobile forces, and not just protect them from afar. But I think this is debated. Actually, I saw it being debated in conference in London by the Rusi. It's a good question. There's not a good answer yet.
Another question: can the Houthis attack South Israel, Eilat, for example?
Theoretically, eventually, yes, the Iranians are extending the range of the UAVs, these big ones that they showed in June 2.5 years ago. They are extending the range and they are almost, they need about 1,800 kilometers. They are almost within that range, or maybe they are already within that range. I think that the possibility is realistic.
I think Prime Minister Netanyahu once mentioned this potential threat, by the way.
Well, he mentioned missiles from southern Iran. Maybe he meant UAVs, but missiles, I don't see any missile there that identify that the range can be extended to 1,800 kilometers. But UAVs, they are very fuel efficient. It's not like a missile which needs all this big rocket engine. This is operated by the small gasoline engine. So you make a fuel tank a little bigger, and it's like your car. You make a fuel tank bigger, and it goes further.
We have another question, not exactly related to the subject of our discussion. Recently, it's been reported that Israel lost a $2 billion defense deal to the UAE to South Korea. Anybody knows the nature of this deal?
No. The South Koreans have an incipient missile industry. They don't have a system yet. They're developing this MSAM, seems to be in a very slow rate. And so much as I know about it, it's not optimized against short-range targets like Iron Dome is. But again, I'm not very familiar with that system. They did very few public tests with it, so there's very little known in public, open literature about South Korean missile. I'm not surprised, by the way, how painful it was. I don't see politically, with all the public
We don't hear you.
relations that we have with in Israel and deploying openly an Israeli, I think, high-profile, prominent system like Iron Dome. It's too much a provocation to the more devout citizens. There is also, you have to take into account the other side of the coin. How much are we willing to send a system like that to allies which where the security situation of defending or protecting our secrets is not guaranteed. This every time we had the problem with the question of some supplying weapons. When I was in the Ministry of Defense to an ally who was not a European or American, we had this painful question: here is the money on one side, and here is guarding our secrets on the other side, and our security. How to balance them?
Okay, any other observations by you? Okay, thank you very much. And I want to remind our audience that soon we'll have another briefing about Turkey. And stay connected with us. All the best from Jerusalem.